Stream validation. So we're just about to stream.
Okay.
And okay.
One of the initial steps of the military PsyOp program is directed toward the hostland military establishment itself. Since the military represents the government to the populace, their actions and attitudes can do much to create a favorable image of that government in the minds of the people. A soldier's attitude goes a long way toward implementing an effective military PsyOp program. Among the support elements needed are the light mobile printing team with its printing and editorial shelters. Also needed is a radio team to support existing radio stations, particularly in the back country. An audiovisual vehicle will help to increase the effectiveness of face-to-face communications. And a loudspeaker team will support tactical operations.
Okay, here we are, we're live, and hopefully everything's going well with everything else. So, since my computer decided to crash, just want to let people know that I'm sorry that we had a little delay in getting started, and I've had to come up with plan B. Now, I am trying to get my computer going because the whole thing relies on me being able to show you screens, but unfortunately my computer is doing weird things. So what I'm going to try to do is see if I can get, maybe Dr. Judy can share screens with me. I'm going to see if we can do it that way.
Oh, I don't know if that would work very well.
We'll see. Anyway, I'm going to introduce Dr. Judy to you, and we promised to start at 1, so I wanted to make sure that we did that. This is very odd because everything was just excellent up until the very last minute. Anyway, hello, Dr. Judy.
Hello.
Okay, I hope everyone can hear. I'm going to check with the audience and make sure. Okay. Oh, I just see a couple of people in the chat, and Jojo is here, and maybe we could start with this actually while I'm just checking on my computer. She says that there was a great interview this week with an architect that spends all his time researching 9/11, and I think that was on Lino. That would be Richard Gage, and he's going to be coming. We're going to be talking about that interview on another show. But maybe you could tell Jojo a little bit about Richard Gage, if you could take a minute while I'm doing this.
Yeah, let free you up for faster, because I have a one-track mind. I can't do two things at the same time either. It's important to identify who really knows what they're talking about versus who says they know what they're talking about. As we've talked about before, architects are not into, they can't sign off on engineering drawings. They don't really understand that it was always the curse of who had to teach statics to the architecture students. It's a watered down class, and they need a lot of hand holding. It's just the beginner pretend engineering class. They can't even take the regular one. But it's a different track. Now, not to say that these aren't smart people. Their skills are in a different area. They can envision things, and they imagine. Like, there's some buildings I used to show in class on the first day that look like they're held up by sky hooks. That's what we called them. When the end of a building was, you wonder what's holding it up. It's just the illusion is that nothing's holding it up. I call that a skyhook idea, but it's they think of these things, and then they figure out how to find an engineer who can make it structurally sound. And another thing that architects do is figure out how many bathrooms need to be in a building and where the bathroom should be, and design things like that, or strip malls. There's a variety of different things they do depending on what kind of engineer they are. And there's a lot to be said about Richard Gage. He's afraid of my work, or likes to bury it as his number one goal, and I do mean that seriously. When he opened the doors to his architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, anybody who had anything to do with Dr. Judy Wood was banned from the group. That's in their original rules for the organization. So one has to wonder why. That becomes a big thing. And there's a interesting phrase that Joni will get set up when she gets her computer working. It's a quote by James Corbett, who says, "But I do find it interesting when certain academics will go out of their way to avoid certain inquiries." Well, I could say the same thing about it. I do find it interesting when, certain alternative media personalities will go out of their way to avoid certain inquiries. And Richard Gage is also one of those that avoids discussing, for example, what's in my book. My book it only contains evidence, but a tremendous amount of evidence, direct evidence and parallel evidence. But Richard Gage would like people to believe it's about laser beams from outer space, and so that you don't need to go look at it. Why would he be so petrified of that? He's asked, over and over again for a new investigation. Well, if you're asking for a new investigation, it's sort of an acknowledgement that you're not capable of doing one yourself. With all these thousands of supposed engineers and architects in this group, do you not think they'd have at least one that could do an investigation, a proper investigation, or even want to read one? There has been a quote new investigation, and it's the one that I've done, and I wrote the report up in my book. That's what the book actually is. The only comprehensive forensic investigation that exists in the public domain. We don't know what they have as top secret. About what happened to the buildings on 9/11. And you first have to begin with what happened before you can go further. You don't start out with playing spin the dial and name that weapon. That's how you run a cover-up. Is the order of crime solving, or solving whatever happened to the building, who did it and all that, is you have to begin with what happened. And only then can you determine how it happened. If you don't know what it is, how can you determine how it happened? If you don't know what happened. And then after that, who did it and why they did it and so forth. And, it's interesting that on 9/11 we were told before noon, who did it and why they did it. They hate us for our freedoms. Before an investigation had been done about what happened. And so the best way to cover things up, if you get people to skip that first step, forget about what happened. Let's go after someone. Go, see who done it. And it must have been this, must have been that. So you get people to argue about how it happened. Well, in order to argue about how it happened, you have to assume what it is. So you're solving an assumed problem. And that, right there, keeps the cover-up in place.
Correct.
Because everyone has a different assumption, and then they're arguing about imaginary problems. Nobody's looking at the real problem then, unless they look at what happened. And that's what my book is about, is what happened. And so why on earth would somebody be so upset about my book? They want to bury it. And to, take great effort to go out of their way to avoid looking at it or discussing it. That should be a red flag.
Yes, that should be a red flag for most people. I'm sorry, I'm just over here in the ether.
Just shut me up when you're done. The truth doesn't. That's nothing. Truth doesn't have sides. And another way to keep cover-ups going is to pretend there's sides. And your side says this, my side says that, back and forth. He did it. No, did not. Did too. Did not. Did too. And that again keeps people from looking at what happened. What happened? It can't be argued. I mean, you can't disprove something that is true. You can only distract people away from it.
That's right.
And try to hide it. So, a true scientist would want to look first at what happened. Like, okay, you find you look out your window after you hear a car screech and you see a dead body in the road. You go out and check. An assumption would be the car ran over him and killed him. But it turns out the body's cold. In other words, it's been dead for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But the immediate assumption would be the car ran over it, and then you start arguing, no, he ran over it, did not, did too. And if somebody doesn't look at what happened to the body, there's no way they can solve the problem. So one of the biggest flags about a cover-up is when they're keeping somebody from looking at what happened. You can't solve it unless you look at what happened. Never, ever solve it until you know what the problem is you need to solve.
Right. I think what we're going to do is have people go over to characterdriven.com. Just going to turn this up a little bit. So if you go over to characterdriven.com, you'll see that there is a drop-down menu. It says Tune In at the top of the page, and it says PsyOp Recovery Program. So what we're trying to do is to get people to see how to use the website, how to be able to use this as a reference, and how to use Dr. Judy's website, because she's got a lot of resources there. Now, what you'll see is PsyOp Recovery Room, and then you'll see the drop-down list, and it'll say January 20th, which coincidentally is today. Now, if you could go to the first link, which is the James Corbett audio, we're going to do this. Hopefully, you'll be able to take a look at this yourself, and we'll be able to get the audio going. And we'll have, I'm just going to test the audio and check it out here. My apologies.
If somebody's on that page, they can look at the transcript of it that we put below it.
Exactly. I'm glad that we were prepared today, because the last thing I would have thought in the world is that my computer absolutely died. It's doing a really funny thing. It's not kicking in. So much for Macs, I have to say. I'm using my PC over here. I have backup, but I am improvising. I have to let people know. Some people are able to do this a little bit better than I, but we have got everything set up here so that you can follow along. There's a transcript. Dr. Judy has her page open, I'm sure, but I'm just going to check this and see if you can hear it via my here, let me just see if we can get this going here. There should be a way for us to get this going here, but
let's move on to an email from Anthony, who writes, I have yet to hear you comment on the split in the 9/11 research movement between the ideas of Dr. Judy Wood.
We do have the sound, so
oh, okay.
So the only thing we don't have is the video. I was going to be able to, but the great thing is that you can actually go over and take a look at it live on characterdriven.com, and if you want to just stay here on YouTube, you can listen along, which is just fine. It'll work well. And so what we're doing is we're over on the PsyOp Recovery Program, James Corbett audio, and it's the one from 6/11/2001. Okay.
2011.
Oh, I'm sorry. I've got 2001 on the brain. Okay. Oh. So let's go over, and I'm going to queue up James Corbett, and you can tell me when you want me to play it, Dr. Judy.
Well, we could play it now. I don't know if I'll be able to hear it.
Well,
I'll have to mute and play mine.
I can actually, let's see how we, yeah, if you could, maybe you could play yours at the same time.
Okay, let me know when to start, and I'll mute my microphone.
Okay. So I'm just going to check in on YouTube. There we go. Okay. I just wanted to let whoever it is know in the chat, because you guys are chatting back and forth about Richard Gage, that we will broach that subject another time. Today we're talking about, we're going to be talking about James Corbett, and because he had some questions that he was answering about Dr. Judy Wood, and they didn't get answered exactly the way that you would think they would by somebody who is.
I don't even think they got answered.
Exactly. Well, okay, so we're going to launch into this, and I just wanted to remind people that we are on characterdriven.com, and if you look at the PsyOp Recovery Program, that's where I've started the video here, and I'm going to go back. This is sort of audio, but we have, okay, so I do have a disclaimer at the beginning, and that's what I'm playing right now. And okay.
Let's move on to an email from Anthony, who writes, I have yet to hear you comment on the split in the 9/11 research movement between the ideas of Dr. Judy Wood and her energy weapon theory and Professor Stephen Jones, who backs the thermite theory. Do you lend any support to Dr. Wood's ideas or research? Right, very good question, Anthony, and I'm sure it's one that many people out there have, so let me be as clear as I can. I do not support mini nukes, I do not support TV fakery, I do not support no planes, I do not support Vic Sims, and I do not support mystery magical energy beams from outer space. And I don't know how much more clear I can get on that, and that's not to say, please don't take that as me saying that I 100% unequivocally believe that the thermite story is the correct story. In fact, I have my reservations about that as well. But personally, ultimately on this question, I think there are a lot of really fascinating and interesting distractions out there from some of the real issues of 9/11. And it's something that I've been saying for years now and continue to stress, that I think that a lot of the physical anomalies of what happened on 9/11 are ways to keep people in these endless infighting arguments about this and that little part of this or that theory, and you don't support this research, or oh my god, you must be COINTELPRO, you must be part of the New World Order. Well, if that's the level of discourse in which you want to participate, then go right ahead and stop listening to me right now. But ultimately, I think that we have to go beyond the physical anomalies of 9/11 and look at the grand context of 9/11. That's something that I've stressed over and over, and it starts with things like following the money trail for 9/11, and looking at the air defenses on 9/11, and looking at the big players on 9/11. Again, there's way too much to go into right now, but suffice it to say, I think that a lot of these ideas, whether consciously put out there by COINTELPRO type people to split up the movement or not, ultimately has that effect. So it doesn't really matter if it's government funded or not. And that's pretty much all I have to say about that at the moment. People can continue to send me links to all of these interesting ideas about the interesting ways that the towers were brought down, and I'll continue to look at them, but I haven't seen a single thing that's convinced me yet of any of these theories, and I doubt that I'm likely to, but again, keep sending it in, and I'll take a look at it.
Okay, there we have it. That was James Corbett, and I'm going to throw it over to Dr. Judy Wood to give her response.
Okay, let me see. I just tried opening something. My computer's kind of slow.
Okay, we're having computer issues today.
Yeah,
now,
I'm gonna play that clip that I was hoping you would play, and let's see if I can turn up the volume. You can hear it. Yeah, he says if I was interested in that, certain academics would go out of their way to avoid certain inquiries. Well, what about radio hosts? Why would he be shunning anything that I present so energetically? Well, first of all, I don't have a theory. I don't present a theory. I don't present ideas. I present evidence. And if you want to solve a problem, you have to start with the evidence. And he's telling people that forget about the details of evidence, ignore the evidence, and let's go on to bigger and better things. You run into real big problems if you do that, because what problem are you trying to solve? You have to define a problem before you can solve it. That's one of the first steps someone learns in their first serious engineering class, engineering statics. You have to state the problem, and then what you're seeking, what answer you're looking for, and then how you go about it. And if you learn to do that methodically, problems tend to almost solve themselves, because you learn by habit then to first define the problem. So looking at evidence is important. Now, what is this about magical mystery?
Beams.
Yeah. What was the exact term?
I'm just looking
at
energy beams from outer space.
Yeah, mystery magical energy beams from outer space. I'm not talking about any kind of magical energy beams, nor am I talking about anything to do with outer space. What I conclude in my book is, we know that something happened to the building. Some process destroyed the buildings. So what was the destructive mechanism? Was it gravity collapse? That would be gravitational energy or kinetic energy. Or did they get cooked to death? That would be thermal energy. Well, the evidence rules out both of those.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Instead of going on about what he doesn't support this, it isn't a case about what you're voting for. These aren't, choices on a ballot. This is talking about evidence. Do you not support looking at evidence? And if you just use that amount of time you spent going off in that tangent to look at the seismic signal, that eliminates a gravity collapse. It eliminates kinetic energy as the destructive mechanism. And if you look at the fact that you had these 14 people that walked out of Stairway B under their own power, they looked up, saw blue sky, walked out in their own power, and they weren't cooked to death.
I would like to just interject for a second, because we have somebody in the chat who says, I'm going to just read it verbatim. There's no dichotomy. James Corbett never disputed anything Dr. Judy has said. He only said that he doesn't fully espouse any theory. And now she's saying she doesn't have a theory. No conflict, exclamation mark 3 times. And then, I trust Dr. Judy and James Corbett more than just about any other truthers, in quotes. So I have a feeling you might have something to say to A.K. Froggy about that, just so that we can go down that trail just for a moment.
What I started out saying, you first have to determine what happened before you can talk about how it happened or who did it or why they did it and all that. What happened? What problem are you trying to solve? And the fact that he's dodging around looking at what happened is a concern, because nothing is useful until you first determine what happened. Otherwise, you're just working on an imaginary problem. And so he's shunning evidence, and that's in his own words, that he was shunning the evidence. He's talked about endless infighting arguments about this and that little. He says part of this theory, part of that theory. It isn't about theories. And you first have to determine what happened, and he's asking people to move on. Don't talk about what happened anymore. Why would somebody want you to not look at what happened? Unless they don't know how to solve problems, or they know how to solve problems but don't want you to solve it. Don't want, it's part of a cover-up. I don't know. I don't know what his motivation is, but whatever it is, it gets in the way of solving the problem. He may not even realize how to solve problems, because he does state at some point that he's not a scientist or an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And so just, playing spin the dial and name that weapon, or spin the dial and name this or that, it isn't how you solve problems. You need to begin with, what do you know? And then, what determine what happened. Like, did the body get run over by a car, or was it dead already from poison, or does it have a bullet hole in it? There's a lot of pieces of evidence you need before you can charge somebody with the crime.
Mm-hmm.
And my favorite example of that is the Casey Anthony event, where people wonder why she was set free. Because they hadn't solved the crime first. They hadn't determined what happened. The prosecution hadn't determined what happened. they couldn't prove she was guilty or whatever because they hadn't solved the crime. They hadn't determined what happened. And so if you're among the folks who believe she's guilty, well, she was let off the hook for life, forever, because someone didn't determine what happened before they took it to court. So the importance of determining what happened can't be overstated.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I think what we're trying to do through this show is not only to talk about people like James who are questioned and then give answers that are not fully realized, but also to help people in the audience to see how a cover-up happens and how people can take you away from finding out what actually happened by distraction. And what he's doing is a classic example of that. So that's really what this show is about, is to help you to see how Dr. Judy sees this, and to see things a little bit through her eyes and her...
How to problem solve.
How to problem solve, exactly. So this is about critical thinking, because we've been PsyOped. So this is the PsyOp Recovery Room, where the people that are joining in here are ostensibly trying to find the real answers and how to get to the real answers. So keeping your mind focused on the evidence is the only way that we're going to do that. I'm going to hand it back to Dr. Judy, but I do want to let people know that in case it's their first time being in the room.
Well, for example, he's talking about we need to go after look at the big players on 9/11. Okay, what did they do? Big players who did, what was it? You know, that's why you have to begin with what the crime was. Instead of assuming a crime.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you talk about the best kinds of cover-ups, and I call them getaway car, is you get people to solve the wrong problem. Then you're home free.
Mm-hmm.
That's how card tricks are done. They get the audience, they don't lie to the audience, they get the audience to assume the wrong problem. You know, like here, pick a card, any card. Now, don't show me what it is. I'm going to turn around, show the audience. Don't let me see it. Now, slip it back in the deck so I won't see where it went. Okay, and then shuffle the cards. See, I can shuffle the cards this many different ways. And shuffle here, shuffle there. Okay, and then pull out a card. By golly, it's the card that the person had picked. And the people, oh, how do you know where that card was in the deck? Because that's where the focus was drawn. It turns out he determined that the quote magician determined what card that person would draw. So the trick was performed before the card was drawn. So you already knew what the card was. So it didn't matter how it was stuck back in the deck, and but the way that the card trick person organized it was to get everyone to focus on how that card got slipped back in the deck. So they were solving the wrong problem. And that's how cover-ups work, is they get people to solve the wrong problem. And it's so important for each and every one of us. And also it's important to us as a whole, as a human race, to be able to think independently and understand what you know. You know what it is that you know. Not that you memorized from somebody else. Mm-hmm. That becomes very important too. And it's okay if you don't know everything. Just know what it is that you are sure that you know, and how you came upon knowing it. And because that's what's getting messed with within us by all the different psyops that's going on, is to confuse people. And the more they get confused, the less they can solve problems. So that's what I would really like people to be able to learn, how to know what it is that they know, mm-hmm. instead of just assuming something. Because it's just like, think of the card trick. You assume the wrong problem. It's set up so you'll assume the wrong problem. If you notice how magicians work, how they direct your attention to something else, so you don't see what they're really up to.
Mm-hmm. Now, in the case of someone like James Corbett, we're not necessarily saying that he's part of the cover-up, but what happens is that he hears talking points as well. He has a big audience, and that's, I guess, the difficulty here is that it gets repeated, not reported. He's taking secondhand information, and then he's disseminating that, and it becomes like that circle where people are passing along a message, and by the end of the circle, the message is completely distorted.
Yeah, I'm not determining what his motive is and what caused him to do what he did. I'm just looking at what the case is. Leave that up to people in the audience to figure that out. It's sort of not so important, because the problem is that how it affects other people. People who trust him then take this on as being truthful, when it turns out James Corbett didn't even know if it was truthful. And that's how the media works. Jody, you can probably think of lots of examples of something that is presented as factual in the evening news, and then a year later they prove that it's false.
Well, I think we're going through that right now. We're actually having an experience of that right at this very moment, because the mainstream media is just desperate to get this narrative across about the PP dossier, as George Webb calls it. But if one reads the PP dossier, which most people haven't, you see how ludicrous it is. And then when that doesn't work, then they move on to something else and something else. And I think in 20 years, we're going to look back and go, oh, it was so obvious that was a cover-up.
Well, how could those people be so stupid to not look at it? That's what somebody might say in the future.
Yes.
Or how could they allow themselves to be manipulated so easily?
Well, we can see that all the time, and I think that's why we have this great intelligent audience here who really wants to find out the truth, because a lot of people will go to other YouTube channels where they're getting all the salacious details, and they're hearing about bombs and thermite and all the rest of it, and they never stop to think about this. And we're going to be talking about that today when you go into the billiard ball example. Do you want to go into the second video?
Do you have that audio clip? I guess you can't play sound.
I can play sound. I'm just trying to find... Okay, so it's that little short clip that we have, and I hadn't downloaded onto this computer. So just to let people know, I'm using an alternative computer. We're winging it.
You used to use an Apple. Now you're using a PC.
And it's not really connected up. I'm actually using a phone, and I'm using a PC and an iPad, but I'm not using my main computer. So without going into that too much, do you have the sound clip? Because if you do have it there, I could probably hear it if you put your microphone near it.
Yeah, let's see.
I find it interesting when certain academics will go out of their way to avoid certain inquiries.
I don't know if you hear it, then I can turn up a little more.
Okay, let me just, I'm going to see if I can find it on.
I find it interesting when certain academics will go out of their way to avoid certain inquiries.
They were talking about Noam Chomsky, that he's saying it, when certain academics go out of their way to avoid discussing certain topics. Well, I think that the same is true for alternative media hosts. That if somebody is going out of their way to avoid something, you have to ask why. Or what do they, when I hear someone doing that, like the Jordan Peterson thing, I started out hearing the Lindsay Shepard clip, and then they're talking about this Jordan Peterson person, and how horrible he is, like he's cancer on society. And, okay, I gotta go listen to that guy. Now, why don't they want me to go listen to him? And I didn't find anything wrong with him at all. To the contrary, it's very enlightening. But when somebody wants you to not go somewhere, except you got to make sure they're not doing reverse psychology and trying to manipulate you there by, the other way. But if they really are trying to hide you from something, or hide something from you, might be a good idea to just check it out to know what you're missing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So I think people did hear that that sound clip, and if they didn't, they can always go over to the YouTube channel, and it's on my main page, and you can hear that. But
it's a good statement. You have to wonder when somebody's dodging something or avoiding something or lying about something.
That's right. Yes, and that's the interesting thing, and that's why we decided to bring up this conversation that he had, because if people are talking about another person's work and basically just misrepresenting them, then it's all fair game to be able to correct the record, I think, and also to help other.
About, mystery, magical energy beams from outer space.
Right.
That's dishonest.
Right. So if anybody wants to go over to Character Driven and take a look at the transcript, I'm going to go back over there. And you'll notice if you look down the page, and I am sorry I can't put this up on the screen, but I am glad that we have it on the website because you can look at it live. I'm going to click on next page, and we're going to go over to the next page, coincidentally, which has the second
video.
Yeah, this one's a video. This is the second clip from James Corbett. In this case, it's a video from 2013. And
it's more recent.
Yes, it's a little bit more recent. And so the transcript, you'll notice, is right underneath there as well. So again, go over to characterdriven.com and you will see exactly what we're seeing here. This is the transcript, and I'm going to play it. Sorry, I'm going to play the actual video.
First,
and you can.
First, I'd like to say, notice that he talks about Roger G. writes to him and has these questions. Note if he ever answers any of the questions.
Right.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, here we go. Okay, we do have the disclaimer as well in front of the actual video itself, that it is being used for educational purposes.
There.
Okay, and up to the video.
Okay, next we have an email from Roger G, and this is another question I get quite a lot. This one reads, have you read Dr. Judy Wood's book, Where Did the Towers Go? What caused steel reinforced concrete, office furniture, filing cabinets, computers, toilets, basins, and people to turn to dust? Why were so many cars so strangely toasted? All right, thank you for that, Roger, and to all the others who have written in on this subject. Of course, I am familiar with Dr. Judy Wood and her work. I am not a proponent of it or an adherent to it. I think she's made basic flaws in physics, for example, with her billiard ball analysis, which provided examples of flagrant violations of conservation of energy and momentum, which wouldn't get you past a high school physics course, let alone anything approaching a resemblance of reality in scientific analysis. I think that if anyone who watches, for example, Dr. Greg Jenkins' interview with Dr. Judy Wood sees that she certainly did not come out the better of the two in that interview, and can't even really seem to provide a coherent view of what she's talking about or the physical principles thereof, and that, for example, the Hutchinson effect has been debunked over and over. So I absolutely do not think that there's any valid reason for believing that Dr. Judy Wood is right on any of the things that she's talking about. And also I should mention that toasted cars, for example, have been repeatedly shown to have, for example, the toasted cars on FDR Drive, which people have gone to absurd lengths to try to explain away. All of this is by way of background of saying that there's absolutely nothing convincing that I've seen in her arguments. However, having said that, I'm also very skeptical about the, for example, the thermitic materials paper that was produced by Dr. Niels Harrit et al. I think there are some scientific questions that have been raised in the last year or two about that paper that I have not seen properly addressed, so I'm going to be keeping my eye out on that. But as I've said over and over and over again on my podcast, I am perfectly happy to let all of the people who want to continue their internecine squabbles over the demolitions of the buildings and to concentrate on that 100% as if 9/11 truth equals the buildings. People who want to do that are absolutely, I'm happy to let them do that, and I will continue to concentrate on all of the other aspects of 9/11, which no one else ever talks about anymore for some reason. No one talks about air defenses, no one talks about the money trail, no one talks about the so-called alleged hijackers, where they came from, their connections, etc., etc. No one talks about all of the background information that makes 9/11 9/11. They only talk about the buildings. I don't talk about the buildings as much anymore because, for one, I'm not a physicist, I don't claim to be one, I'm not a scientific, I'm not an engineer, I'm not an architect, so I'll leave that to other people to squabble over. I will talk about the issues that I'm more interested in, and Dr. Judy Wood is not one of them.
So, that's pretty clear for those of you that think that they are on the same page as far as James Corbett agreeing Dr. Judy Wood in any way. I think he makes it really clear that that's not the case, and he's not interested in the buildings. He's not interested in anything about what happened. He just wants to know what happened after what happened. So I'm going to hand this over to Dr. Judy Wood to talk to James Corbett about this through you guys.
Well, yeah, I'll first begin with, let me make sure I wasn't muted. Begin with noting, I'm the only person who took this, what happened, to court. It isn't like squabbling over nothing. It's, I determined what happened, and I did something about it. I took it to court, but there was a big effort made to suppress any support for this case. I know several people who were in AE9 I Love Truth who were banned from the group for talking about it because they didn't want other people to get wind of it because it might actually go forward then if there was interest in it. And how that ended, the judges in the written decision noted the law, FERA, applied to my case, so they were ignoring the law to dismiss the case. They actually stated that. The law applied to the case, that they were ignoring the law to dismiss this case. But if you had a few thousand people out in the street making noise and getting on the evening news, you bet they wouldn't be able to dismiss it so easily. There were two people in the audience at that time. Go on, talk about other things then, but I won't. Okay. Going back to the questions, have you read Dr. Judy Wood's book, Where Towers Go? He didn't address that question. What caused the steel in reinforced concrete, office furniture, file cabinets, and toilets and so forth to turn to dust? He didn't answer that. Why were so many cars so strangely toasted? Didn't answer that. Instead, it was deflection and anger and smear. Now, let's begin with, it stated, I think she's made basic flaws in physics, for example, with her billiard ball analysis. It was an example of analysis, which provide examples of flagrant violations of conservation of energy and momentum, which couldn't get you past high school physics course. Notice he later said, towards the end, he's not a physicist or an engineer. So, did he make that assessment, or was that a talking points list that he was reading off? But let's talk about the billiard ball example. And I'll say how that came to be. On 9/11, the buildings went poof into dust, right in front of us on the TV set there. And I'm looking at my colleagues like, you aren't buying this. Some strange going, that's not a collapse. And they looked at me like I was crazy. What kind of a lunatic did we hire? And I could see they were already sucked into it. And they're busy thinking, we got to go get somebody. We got to take them out. We got to take them all out. And they're just caught up in the moment. And then I wanted to make some calculations about how long it would take to drop a bowling ball off the roof of the building. And then if it was a progressive collapse, what time that would be. That's when the billiard ball example was born. It was an example of timing. Nothing else, just timing. So you stand on the roof of the building. Okay, let's assume. Anyway, I did these calculations, and I thought, well, maybe I have the coefficient of gravity wrong. And so I went and looked at my physics book. No, that's the right number. Oh, maybe that was a typo, and I memorized the wrong number. I was desperate to find some kind of explanation as to why everyone else was cuckoo. And no. Then I had this billiard ball thing, and I showed it to one of my colleagues. He acted like I was having a senior moment. Of course, that's correct. He didn't realize that applied to the buildings. And then when it applies to the building, suddenly logic goes out the window. That's when I saw the power of the billiard ball example. You take the flying dead bodies and horror scene out of their consciousness and just focus on innocent billiard balls dropping through space. And suddenly logic can work. And so that's what it's all about, just the timing. And shall we go look at that page?
Mm-hmm.
I think, Joni, is that where it says next page, or is that?
It is. Okay.
Okay, and
For
that
those-
takes you to the billiard ball page?
For those that are following at home, you can go along to next page at the bottom of this page. There we go.
And there's that, was it 8 ball that you click on, and you go to the
Yes.
one on my website. And this is the same one that he showed in his video. That's what really puzzles me. He didn't show the title of it, where it says billiard ball example, and it was just a refutation of the official story. And I'm not proving how long it took to destroy the boats or how long it should have taken. I'm just showing the official story is bogus.
Can I just, I'm just going to let people know that if they want to go directly to the website, they can do that. It's drjudywood.com, and you'll notice at the top of the page it will say billiard balls. Okay, and it's about
one of those little links, yeah.
Yeah, if you're not on character driven at this point, then you can go directly to the website and you can see, you can follow along. Okay?
Yeah, it says 2 yellow boxes just to the right of it says billiard balls. From the drjudywood.com page. Okay, this shot, except blocking out the title and my name, James Corbett showed, or at least blocking out the title, he showed on his little video clip. And if you notice what's in that box, that becomes important. It says, well, you want to read it, Joni?
In the box, yes I do. Just turning out my mic.
It says note.
Okay, it says, note, the alert observer will recognize that this analysis utilizes the conservation of momentum and the conservation of energy. And then there are some links down for a review. See here. So.
And that says I take quizzes 1, 2, and 3 at the bottom.
Yes.
Yeah, there's like 5 little here links. And the reason why I put that there is because various detractors would send out disinfo about what this thing was about, and say that she totally violates the laws of physics and conservation of energy and so forth, and people would just memorize that, and then they write to me and say, you imbecile, whatever, and I'd say, well, have you read the page? Okay, if so, then take quizzes 1, 2, and 3 before I'll respond, again. And
brilliant.
It's really effective. And if somebody starts off with this other idea of what's on the page and needs to be deprogrammed from that, that's what the here and here links are, like what the page is actually about. And as I say, it's a simple example to disprove the official story. And I give this example. So let's say I tell you that I ran by foot to the store 10 miles away, then to the bank 5 more miles, then to the dog track 7 more miles, then to my friend's house 21 more miles, and then home, all in 2 minutes. To disprove the story, I can present a simple case that the world's record for running just 1 mile is 3 minutes 43 plus seconds, or just under 4 minutes. So it doesn't seem possible that I could have run over 40 miles in 2 minutes. It doesn't seem possible for me to have run 43 miles in half the time it would take the world record holder to run just 1 mile. Even if you gave me the benefit of doubt of having run all 43 miles at world record pace, it would not have been possible to have covered that distance in 2 minutes. So it doesn't need to be complicated. So I'm not proving how long it should have taken, but that it was impossible for it to happen the way we were told. And then, I don't even need to prove how much longer it would have taken if I stopped to place a bet at the dog track. In other words, that's going to just be more time. So it's going to be even harder to satisfy the official story. I use that example as sort of analogy for if we neglect air resistance, and it still takes too long to get to the bottom, adding air resistance is going to make it even longer. Kind of like stopping to place a bet at the dog track. It's not going to help the situation. It's not going to help prove that I could run all that distance in 2 minutes. So, start out, if you drop a bowling ball off the roof of the building, and we're assuming a vacuum. it's going to take over 9 seconds for it to hit the ground below. Yet the ground only shook for 8 seconds. Yeah, right there is proof that there's a problem. That's just if you drop a billiard ball over the edge and have it fall at free fall speed. Then so it's in a vacuum, and so it's going to take longer if it's not in a vacuum, and so it's not going to help the situation. So 9.22 seconds is what it would take in a vacuum off of Tower 1. Okay, now next section of the page about the pancake theory. Well, how did the buildings go away? Did you see a stack of pancakes at the bottom, boom, 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 and they all stacked up? Or did you see them turning into dust as it went down? I said I'm turning into dust as it went down. This is Model B, I call it. Just everything was frothing up into dust. There wasn't a stack of pancakes at the bottom, so there was no pile driver. So what I'm saying in this example is, I also show the dust over a few blocks away and say, how did this dust help contribute to the pile driver effect? No, the dust was aloft. The building was really turned into dust. Most of it was. And so if you're going to try to get all the building down, let's say it was this, progressive collapse. Let's overestimate the amount of damage. Let's say 9 out of every 10 floors was removed. So let's, for your imagination here, just pretend there's somebody standing on every 10 floors, holding their arm out the window with a billiard ball in it. And the reason why I use billiard balls is they're all standard issue, except for the cue ball. We're going to ignore that one. But they're all the same. They just have different colors. They're the same aerodynamic properties, same weight, everything's the same. So you have somebody on the 110th floor drops a blue ball, and the person on the 100th floor holding the red ball has to wait until that blue ball comes by before they can let go of the red ball. And so forth, all the way down. And the reason why I have it set up that way is that if you have from 110 floors down to the 100th floor turning to dust, it doesn't have enough energy to turn everything to dust, nor does it have enough energy to initiate the next collapse. But we'll pretend it does just for timing's sake. We'll get the timing. And so it's the motion starts over again, because if there's somehow some little bit extra energy, it can trigger it. Now you can't have dustification you can't have pulverization without having a rigid floor to smack something against. So that floor has to be rigid while the other one smashes into it. It can't be traveling already, because then it's like a shock absorber. So that's why the red ball has to wait until the blue ball gets there to trigger it. And if you scroll down to the next graph picture, you can see the blue ball, it drops to the ground in 9.22 seconds. But in 2.8 seconds it takes it to get from the 110th floor to the 100th floor, and that's when the red ball gets to get dropped. And then it starts down, then the 90th floor, somebody has their arm out the window holding the yellow ball, and then it gets let go. And so forth. And that takes over 30 seconds. Just looking at the timing. And that's saying every 10 floors are missing. 9 out of every 10 floors. And then if you take out, go floor by floor by floor by floor, that's over 90 seconds. It's almost 100 seconds. Well over a minute. And pretty soon you realize a progressive collapse can't work. It's like you can't run 43 miles in 2 minutes. That story doesn't work. And so even if you gave the red ball a head start, I'm talking about figure 7 here. Let's say you give the red ball a head start, sometime 2.4 seconds before the blue ball gets there to trigger it. This is how to get everything on the ground in 9.5 seconds. And then the yellow ball gets a head start before the red ball gets there to trigger it. This shows that the floors below had to have a head start before they got hit to be a progressive collapse. But then, how could it be dustifying? How could it trigger it to release? How could it be already traveling? It can't be moving unless something hits it to move it. So, but even if you do that, it shows that those other floors have to be removed ahead of time. But still, you can't get on the ground that fast. And so, here's when we have a problem. What it becomes clear is that the building did not slam to the ground, but was mostly turned to dust in midair. But this isn't about billiard balls hitting each other. It's just timing devices. So somebody who is claiming that, something about conservation of energy, conservation of momentum, is working on that, hasn't read the page. They have no idea what this page is about. I showed this to several of my former professors, and they thought it was a genius. And also my colleagues, when I was a faculty member, actually, some of them, it allowed them to paint themselves in a corner they couldn't get out of. Because it's just innocent billiard balls, at the beginning. And so they're following through like they're grading a student's paper, and pretty soon, by the time they get to the end, it's undeniable what the story is, and they got really upset because they didn't see that they're painting themselves in a corner that they couldn't get out of. And it was just terrifying because it was just undeniable what the story was. Mm-hmm. So if somebody wants to argue about it, at the bottom I have conservation of momentum equations, conservation of energy equations, and then assuming elastic collisions and inelastic and all this stuff. And then I have quiz number 1 and quiz number 2. You can go through these yourself, or if you know somebody that you need to deprogram, have them go through it. Like, for example, how that dust a few streets over contribute to the pile driving effect of pushing the building down. If you have a significant amount of dust elsewhere, that material is not pushing the building down. And why do you have there's just a bunch of questions there, and different images to look at and say, why is this way? And it's something that somebody ought to figure out. Like those little momentum balls that are usually used for conservation of momentum examples. If I show it with the 2 balls disappeared, because if they turn to dust, how can they whack the next ones? Mm-hmm. With pulverization, I mean, you can't. They're gone. So that material is not there to build up this big pile driver. So a lot of people imagine what the problem is about, and so that's part of their imagining that, okay, we have this pancake collapse. So they're in their own mind have all these stacks of pancakes. But if you look, that can't be what's happening. How do you get this humongous dust cloud squirting out if that material if the energy is being used as a pile driver? You can't. You have it both ways. You can't have pulverization and one hitting the next.
Right.
With a collapse, because in order to get pulverization, I'm not talking about dustification, I'm talking about pulverization. If you have pulverization, one floor smacks another one. That floor that smacks into has got to be rigid in order to pulverize it. Mm-hmm. If it acts as a shock absorber, it's not going to pulverize it. And we can see at the end of the story that it's just most of the material is gone into dust. Mm-hmm. So these various quiz questions at the end with some images too. Let's have quiz number 3. You can see what the example here is, where it's working towards. What is the purpose of this web page? And if you have trouble with that, it says, see here, it takes you back up to the explanation of proving the official story is bogus.
It's a very clever little quiz, and I think it's quite funny. It shows that you have a sense of humor as well as, the way that you approached this was quite humorous.
And why are the billiard balls used as timing devices? Okay, and then why do you need to model what really happened in order to prove the official story is false? Oh, no, don't you need to model what really happened in order to prove the official story is false? And no, see here, like go to the dog track analogy. You can have something really simple that disproves the official story. You it doesn't need to be some exotic thing. And then, if you wish to email me and insist this page is flawed, please include your answers to all of the quiz questions so I can better help you.
Right.
Please include your answers to quiz 1, quizzes, 2, and 3.
And how many people have actually done that over the years since you put this up?
When they would write to me, they wouldn't have the quiz question answers. They decided they didn't need to do that because they knew that the page was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, I don't need to answer your email until you know. Nobody ever had all the answers and then would email me. Because this solves itself. Because I fine-tuned this so that it took care of any escape hatches,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak, because of what the errors were that people were picking up on.
Mm-hmm.
But there's nice links in here that take you back to where you went wrong. What is the purpose of this page? And you see here, this is in question 3. It takes it up there to what the purpose is of the page.
Can I ask a question that is not quite on topic, but it has to do with the buildings themselves from page 24 in your book? Extremophile 911 says he or she is questioning what you mean by bio-inspired structures.
Oh, I was going to open page 24, but I already know the answer to that one. Yes, it's the end of chapter 2. But bio-inspired means it's like a tree. Trees are in rings. It makes them real strong. Squirrels can dig holes in them and hollow them out, like the Keebler elves could put their cookie oven in it. I joke about that, but you can have a rotten place in a tree where a squirrel lives, or something else lives, and it doesn't destroy the tree. Eventually, disease may kill the tree, but it's the rings within rings that's such a strong structure about a tree. And the World Trade Center is the same thing. It's a tube within a tube. And it was to mimic the motion of a tree. How trees blow in the wind, and that actually helps the tree's stability because a tree leans over in the wind, and so it helps with that. And it can eventually lose leaves if it actually has to, if the wind gets strong enough. But if it stood rigidly straight up, it would have to be a lot stronger. But if it could bend over in the wind, then it doesn't have to be as strong. It's a much stronger design, and that's how the World Trade Center was built, with a tube within a tube, so it could afford to have big holes in it or open space in it for people to live or work.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think that answers the question, hopefully. There are a couple of people that are getting a lot out of the conversation because they're surprised, I guess, that James Corbett actually addresses this in this way, but also people do trust James Corbett, as have I. And then what I find from looking at the information in Dr. Judy Wood's book, Where Did the Towers Go?, you can actually start to look at other people's work and judge it by that criteria. I didn't realize it for quite a long time, but if they don't understand this, then either they're not looking or they're purposely not understanding it, and they're offering something.
Or they're listening, is it following talking points or hearsay? And there was, for a while, a bunch of detractors who would, mass mail people or something. The tremendous number of people would try to contact me saying the billiard ball thing was a flagrant violation of laws of physics. Well, show me where, show me how. And it was because they were going on the rumor mill rather than on what was really on the page. And so that's what the quiz thing is, to try to deprogram that out of people and look at what is on the page. And that's why I found so ironic that James Corbett even had his camera, on the video thing, zoom in on that. No, the alert observer will recognize that this analysis utilizes the conservation of the conservation of energy.
There are two words that are really key.
Here, near.
Alert observer, and I think that's the really funny thing, and that is the kind of sense of humor that you have, because it's the alert observer that will understand these things, and yet so many people will just bypass that and he even shows it on that video. You can take a look at it if you like. It is up on the website. And clearly, there's not an alert observer behind that observation, because if you simply go and take a look at the information, you would never say such a thing as it's what, grade 6 math or something like. Oh, you would flunk grade 6 math apparently, and that's how you got your PhD, I think.
Right.
And yet he's not a scientist and he's not a physicist, but he's judging your level of physics ability as grade 6.
And there's also been people who claim my, the first article on my website that has, Star Wars beam weapons. They claim that's about, I'm talking about laser beams from outer space. And they even show the title of the pages. It's at the top block of every one of those pages in that series as to what the title means. It's because Stephen Jones and others were saying energy weapons don't exist. So by hammering it in, the Star Wars beam weapons, what was the Star Wars program about? And don't you think other countries have developed such things? But the whole article is about evidence. But the title was there to kind of jolt people into realizing, I guess on one of these pages you saw the microwave oven. Yeah, people have heard of that. That's another thing. It's an energy. It wasn't used as a weapon to cook your food, but it's another form of directed energy. What I mean by directed energy is instructed energy. It's instructed to do something else than what it normally does.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and,
for anybody that doesn't think that there is such a thing, I have a couple of videos up, but it's easy to find them. In Iraq, they're using directed energy weapons all the time.
Well, it's directed energy everywhere. What's a cell phone?
Mm-hmm. We're using it right now.
You've seen it in the spy movies. They use a cell phone to detonate a bomb someplace, or have a cell phone in somebody's backpack that they ring their number and their backpack blows up. Or it's even in various movies about that. But you have a remote control on your TV set or your stereo or something. That's directed energy. It's not a directed energy weapon unless you're using it as a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean by directed energy, energy is being instructed to do something. It's not kinetic energy and it's not thermal energy, and and we can rule those out with what happened to the towers. So the energy was instructed to do something else than it normally does. It was instructed somehow to come apart. And how do we know that? Because we saw it. The building came apart right before our eyes. The building mostly turned to dust in midair. That in itself is proof that some sort of technology exists that can do what was done.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to know the serial number of it to observe the evidence. Like a tornado. A tornado comes through town and it flattens everything in its path. You don't need to make calculations on how much energy is required to determine whether or not a tornado destroyed your town. You just can see a tornado came through and here's what happened. And so it's a tremendous amount of energy. And imagine, do you think that somebody would have learned how to weaponize a tornado by now? That's a suggestion.
Or a hurricane, perhaps.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, now go to the next one, which is is this harder for people to find? The Greg Jenkins transcript.
Okay.
He's talking about the Greg Jenkins quote interview.
I just want to let people know, if they are on the character-driven site, that they can go down to the bottom of the page on each of these 4 pages, and it will say next page. There's a button that you can click. So at the bottom of the transcript that we just went through with James Corbett, if you slide down to the bottom, there's a button that says next page, and you will be at, we were at the billiard ball example. Now we're going to next page. Same deal. Down at the bottom, then we're going over to transcript. It says transcript.
Okay.
Greg Jenkins interviews Dr. Judy Wood, and I'm going to take that direct link and I'm going to post it into the chat, okay? And I'll let you go ahead.
Okay. Actually, I heard an interview recently, last night actually, that reminded me so much of this. It was somebody in England interviewing Jordan Peterson, somebody I think from the BBC, and it was the same sort of nonsense. And at the end, what does the listener get out of it? Nothing. And it had nothing to do with the interviewee. It was the interviewer that was in charge. It was just this argumentative. You said this. No, I didn't. I said this. And it just goes round and round in circles. And it's sort of like, have you stopped beating your spouse yet? And just over and over again. And there's nothing useful comes out of it. But with the video part of it, Greg Jenkins is rolling his eyeballs and looking exasperated, like that's supposed to convince the audience of something. And the lighting is straight on in Greg Jenkins, and then it's like, remember telling ghost stories as a kid? You hold your flashlight under your chin, you look spooky. It's that type of lighting. And this thing was totally under false pretenses.
Mm-hmm.
And Fetzer had gotten me there, and then when they railroaded me off for this quote interview, Fetzer disappeared. Then he came in the room partway through. I was kind of mopping the floor with Greg Jenkins, and Fetzer was still going according to script, but the situation hadn't. And he came in, rolled up his sleeves like he was going to punch out Greg Jenkins and save the damsel in distress. Oh, the damsel was not in distress. It was Greg Jenkins.
Mm-hmm.
It was interesting, but it's the way it was put together as a hit piece with the poor lighting, the profile shot and the pink face, and poor focus and all. But Greg Jenkins looked head-on shot, and then he did his eye rolling. He's apparently good at that. But what's also interesting is anyone heard from him since? And whatever became of him, why did he do this? He was between jobs, I guess, and did it. We don't know if he was paid or how much. But then he went back to do a postdoc after that, and probably wanted to have a professional career. But he probably hopes that this is still on the internet because it really makes him look bad.
And I just wanted to say that, I'm sorry to interrupt, but one of the reasons that we just have the transcript there is because it is hard to find the video now, and it has been taken down. But the reason that we chose to put it up here and why Dr. Wood wanted to address this is because it comes up in James Corbett's video that we just listened to. He says that the interview with Greg Jenkins was one of the things that convinced him. I believe that was the wording, something to that effect. So that's why we have it here.
Yeah, then I have nothing valuable to say.
Oh.
I don't think he even watched the thing. And actually, I had somebody who did watch it who contacted me. I'm more free to talk about it because the person is no longer. And otherwise I wouldn't. But who contacted me to congratulate me for having figured it out. They had their hands tied as to what they could or couldn't say, but it was very interesting. They thought it was brilliant. I didn't say anything I didn't want to say, and I called him on it each time he was trying to change the subject. I was talking about domestication, and he would change it to pulverization or vaporization. I'd catch him every time, and he'd circle around. He was trying to put words in my mouth so that he could say "gotcha." It was the whole thing, and this, I was naive then. That was the best opportunity to get me, but still, and I wasn't expecting to be interviewed, and I hadn't slept for a couple of days. Some other shenanigans were going on in my life that I had to get straightened out, like my debit card came up as stolen or something, so I had no money. Fetzer was going to wire me money because it was so important for me to get there. That was weird. Mm-hmm. Anyway, if you look at it, I'm proud of myself for as naive as I was to still not be railroaded. I was just being sincere and just being straightforward and honest. But it's because he was doing the strange lighting and all that. But if you listen to the audio and then see what really was stated. And I've got, he had this one image that he brought, that was the only image, and it was out of focus and black and white. And I tried to do a best replica of it I could there. And say what form of energy and then turn to dust. He tried to make me look silly, saying any part of the building turned to dust. He insisted that all of the rubble was there. There's a huge pile of rubble there, and none of the dust went up. And so I've got photographs in here, because I wasn't going there to get interviewed. The professor said he was presenting my material and needed me in the audience to answer questions about his presentation. That wasn't what I was there for. That's what he told me. And I called out some errors in his presentation. He told me to shut up. But anyway, why is he presenting my work if he didn't understand it? So if you can go down to various things like, he said, what kind of energy? I don't know. Why do I have to know that? This isn't, the gospel, the end point. This is ongoing research that energy was instructed to do something differently than it normally does. You can rule out kinetic energy, you can rule out thermal energy. What's wrong with that? But he was trying to get me to state something, and he wasn't, beyond what I knew, and he wasn't successful. Again, know what it is that you know, and know everything else you don't know. So he couldn't, this is, here's one segment in here. Greg Jenkins says, well, I do have some questions, but I've come up with an energy scale for the problem. If you use, like, say, a photon beam, see, he's making assumptions, or a laser beam of some kind, you run into some problems, namely the amount of energy required to evaporate steel tower. And I said, wait a minute, you're specifying evaporation. He said, sure. I said, well, what about dustification? I'm talking about dustification. Isn't that what we're talking about? And then he says, now you want to talk about dustification. That's what we're talking about. He would do this over and over again, try to merge into something else. And I'm not, ruling out high heat. See, he's trying to use a laser beam or something to make high heat. And no, there's no evidence of high heat. To the contrary, because you didn't have people burning up. You didn't have thing glowing in the dark. So I question why doesn't he know the topic he brought up? And then he hasn't never heard of an explosive, and how energy can make something explode. Well, put an egg in a microwave oven, get a balloon and pop it, what type of energy? Well, it happens with different types of energy, what kind of energy beams? So he's trying to force me to be more specific than I'm prepared to be. And I don't go there, and that's what I'm really proud of myself on. But what usefulness is he trying to get out of this interaction? And nothing. That's what becomes quite clear. Like he's talking about where the dust comes from, where's the debris, and he says, well, you don't see falling debris in that picture? No, I just saw this dust cloud. It's the picture I talk about is the mushroom cloud or the snowball, and the building is intact below that. And it's about 2/3 of the building's missing. You have this like big ball of dust, and he starts talking about, you see no debris falling. No, the picture doesn't have good enough resolution. No, you don't see anything falling. Nothing falling. And it goes back and forth, and then he's imagining some other image and criticizing me for not seeing it in this imagined image he has, but he's got this one image in front of me. And it goes round and round, and he says, well, maybe I remember the wrong image. and when I kind of cornered him, that's the time Fetzer came in.
Mm-hmm.
But he wants to argue different things. He doesn't even know the height of the building. He got kind of rattled because he was failing at the job he was supposed to be doing. And it's just round and round and round and round. And then, but back then, it was very effective at keeping people from looking at the fact that most of the building turned to dust. He succeeded in putting that question off, or that piece of evidence off, for almost 10 years. I was ridiculed tremendously over time for saying most of the building turned to dust. And, he wasn't ridiculed for saying none of it turned to dust. So it's pretty peculiar how that PsyOp kind of works.
Mm-hmm. And I
I've
just
got
wanted
pictures of it going up into the atmosphere.
I wanted to interject just for a moment because we are talking about PsyOps. So we're talking about how they work and trying to help you to understand, you and the audience to understand, and to be able to pass this on and to educate yourself so that you understand the difference between information and evidence. You know, people who just throw something out there, like James Corbett did in that video. He throws out quite a few different things, and if you start looking at the video very carefully, you can see a number of different things that sound plausible but have no basis in fact, and you can tell that once you've read the book, and I hope you all have, that he's not referring to the book. He's referring to hearsay yet again, and he brings up Greg Jenkins, and he talks about the energy beams, which is right out of the transcript there. Doesn't mean to say that James Corbett understands about that. Now, this is not a criticism necessarily of James Corbett, except for the fact that he himself says that he believes in academic integrity in the clip that was played at the top of the show, and which you can see if you go to the YouTube channel. There is actually there is a clip there that includes that quote. So if people are putting themselves forward and saying that they believe in academic integrity, then they need to practice that themselves. And that's part of what we're addressing here today.
There's a particular part in here where, let's see, Greg Jenkins says, the minimum amount of energy to evaporate a wire by fire, by electric current, by anything, and then I interrupt him and say, we're not talking about evaporation. This is like being silly because he keeps turning into evaporation. I said, no, we're talking about dustification, and you're talking about beam energy, then laser energy, then it's about vaporization. You know, if I'm saying, can you stay on the same topic the whole sentence through? It was obvious that he was going around. So I was being so kind about it that it didn't. You know, I wasn't rolling my eyes and acting exasperated. I was just being patient with him, as though he needed to get over PsyOp. You know, being under a PsyOp, but it was clear he had some other agenda. But would keep trying to twist it into something else, like having to calculate how much energy was required for his theory. No, you don't need to make calculations to observe that most of the building turned to dust in midair. You can observe that. Doesn't matter what your calculation shows. It's like a tornado. You can observe the destruction left behind by a tornado. You don't need to make calculations about how much energy it should take, so therefore, oh, a tornado couldn't have done that. You know, you just say that a tornado did it, so therefore it's possible for a tornado to do that. Because it could, you know, like what I've said is the evidence of what happened is evidence that a technology exists that can do what was done. So let's look at what was done.
Mm-hmm. That's such an interesting thing because it's so obvious and so simple, really, in its concept, because it's like a tornado. We can see the destruction that's done. We look at Harvey and we can see the destruction that's done, and it's clear that there is some phenomenon in weather that can create this kind of destruction. We can look at it and we can observe it. And as Dr. Wood says, we don't need to calculate the velocity of the wind and that sort of thing. That's something that we can look at later. And if we're trying to make our buildings wind resistant, then of course we would want to know these things. But it doesn't.
It's a good time to bring in Occam's razor.
Yes.
Despite how it's been distorted, Occam's razor is minimizing the amount of assumptions you have to make. It's a minimum number of assumptions. So if you determine exactly what happened and you don't have any assumptions at all, that's obviously the right answer. Or you know, in terms of what happened. But if you start adding in assumptions, then you're not going with evidence of what happened. If you have to do calculations, and that's based on assumptions. How do you make a calculation off of something unless you're assuming what the process is? See, I'm not assuming the process. I'm saying energy was somehow told to do something. And it's not the normal thing of kinetic energy or thermal energy. We don't need to, define exactly what it was or the serial number of the parts and all that. That's a distraction. That keeps you from looking at the evidence. The evidence, most of the building turned to dust. Yes or no?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. And that is a hard thing for people to stick with. And I speak for myself, and when I say this, it's taken me a long time to just go back to the simplest concept, because people are creative. People want to come up with different ideas. People are dramatic. And I think part of Hollywood and television is to help us to get our imaginations going in ways that will distract us from the obvious.
There's so many, well-meaning people that repost one of my interviews or presentation. They say, "Oh, Dr. Wood proves that DEW was used to destroy the towers." I've never said that, and I never would. The mechanism of destruction was directed energy or instructed energy. That's what something told the atoms to come apart. But I'm not defining any type of weapon, conventional or whatever. I'm just saying what the mechanism was. The mechanism is directed energy. Okay, so such a technology exists. This is evidence that such a technology exists. Now, how can we use it for good things?
Mm-hmm.
And so we use it to provide free energy to the world. I'm not saying a free energy gizmo was used to destroy the towers. No. This is like my statement about Hiroshima. In 1945, the evidence of what happened to Hiroshima is evidence that could be of technology can be used for nuclear power plants. I'm not saying nuclear power plants destroyed Hiroshima. It's evidence that a technology that can do nuclear power plants exists. That's the meaning of, in the subtitle of saying evidence of directed free energy technology. I didn't say that directed free energy technology was the gizmo used in 9/11. I'm just talking about evidence and the implications of that evidence, and that is the part that really needs to get covered up. As Andrew says, that's the big one.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew Johnson.
Andrew Johnson. Check the evidence.com. So there's a question. Is it futile to search for the destructive mechanism specifically? I would say it's not futile to search for the destructive mechanism. I think it's out there. It's clearly out there.
That's what I've determined is the destructive mechanism. Let's see if I can get to that page just before the start of the book.
Can I just say that what I know about that, which isn't very much, but I can see that you look for the same evidence as you can see there.
Let me go ahead and read what I have in front of my book. It's a statement I often use. If you listen to the evidence carefully enough, it will speak to you and tell you exactly what happened. If you don't know what happened, keep listening to the evidence until you do. The evidence always tells the truth. The key is not to allow yourself to be distracted away from seeing what the evidence is telling you. And what the evidence is telling me, and went through everything, and I don't ever tell the evidence what the answer is. I let the evidence tell me. You just keep nailing down all the evidence that you can until it emerges. It comes clear to you. And the evidence is that something directed the energy inside the material to repel, for the atoms to repel each other instead of attract each other. That was the mechanism of destruction. I call it directed energy or instructed energy. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying what the gizmo was, but in my book I say it's all evidence. It's direct evidence of what happened in 9/11. It also has parallel evidence of things we already know about that can do the same thing, like tornadoes. Tornadoes dustify things, they levitate things, they have strange properties in very, very similar ways. And the work of John Hutchison, he's been debunked as what James Corbett says, well, has James Corbett ever been to John Hutchison's lab and witnessed it in person? I have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but he's got this like piece of wood embedded in aluminum. I would like James Corbett to explain how that got there. So if you melt aluminum to pour over a piece of wood, they use conventional energy, heat, thermal energy. It's going to burn up the wood if the aluminum is melted over the thing. This shows that the aluminum melted without heat, without excessive heat, because the wood didn't burn up.
Mm-hmm.
Why doesn't James Corbett replicate that in some other way? We have this Nace Baker character who tried to fake all these things, but he couldn't fake a whole bunch of the stuff. Like John Hutchison showed levitation of water droplets going up. Now, how do you fake that? Oh, it was filmed in a box upside down. Well, how do you get water held with magnet upside down?
Yeah. And I find it interesting that James says it in such an emphatic way, because he says it's been debunked over and over and over. He seems very adamant about the John Hutchison experimentation. He does say Hutchinson, I think, but it's Hutchison.
Yep. Yeah, it's Hutchison. Also, the video clip that he's showing there is not a video clip of levitation. It's a video clip of when Hutchison tried experimenting with putting a whole bunch of charge on his little toy UFO to watch how it distorted. And you can see it bounce off the floor and off the walls. He's got it, yes, on a string so it doesn't fly out of the zone. Where he's got a wire on it, putting in a bunch of high charge. And you see that thing like flatten out and bounce up. Looks almost like a cartoon if you looked at the whole video clip. But that's where that clip is from. And folks would say, see, he uses a wire. Well, he wasn't doing levitation experiment. This was something else. It was about distortion, highly charging something. And actually, it was in the 50s, Project Winter Haven, they were determining how they could charge airplane wings to make the airplane go faster. Just putting a big electrical charge on the airplane wings. So there's actual experiments that have been done that went underground after that. That are probably those people in the Star Wars program know something about these things. But that's of course classified. But stuff that's not classified is stuff we have access to. Mm-hmm. And somebody just says Hutchison has been debunked. Well, how? I mean, have you been there and been responsible enough to know what it is that you know, or you just memorizing a list of talking points? If you think about who would want this information covered up, a whole lot of people, a whole lot of entities and organizations. That's why you don't just take your word for it based on a list of talking points that everyone mimics. Because think about a technology that could turn the towers to dust. Most of the material turned to dust in midair. Think of the implications of that. It might even have to do with the very, basis of life on this planet. It's far-reaching. This is like, the big one, as Andrew Johnson has said. You think of the implications. You can turn something to dust, mostly to dust in midair.
Mm-hmm.
You could provide free energy to the planet. But then, he who controls the energy controls the people. So you want to control energy, so if you want to control people. Some characters get off on controlling people for some reason.
Yeah. We've kind of noticed that. I think this is really interesting timing for this particular topic, because we're looking at this memo that they are going to disclose, and of course they're saying that it goes right back to 9/11. These are a lot of the same players, but that doesn't mean to see they are the players. It's just that what it does is uncovers a whole modus operandi that has been in place. I mean, obviously Eisenhower was talking about this in '61 when he was talking about the military-industrial complex.
But more important than that,
mm-hmm.
than the military-industrial complex, that's the one that's often repeated. There's the rest of that in in the farewell address, where he's talking about the technological elite having control of everything, where government grants become a replacement for intellectual curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we are. It's amazing listening to that. He's talking about computers replacing chalkboards. This is in 61. It's incredible, the foresight he had in talking about this. But it's the academic industrial complex, if you want to call it that, where, and we've mentioned it before about, why don't you have professors speaking out about 9/11? Well, they get their nose cut off. Keep your head down and mind your own business. Because if you stick your neck out, I can guarantee you're not going to get more government grants. And you're ostracized and then some. You don't get anywhere. And this has happened in the climatology area too. Dr. Judith Curry experienced that, and just as such a minor thing she was talking about, and she was ostracized. She'd been the head of her department.
Mm-hmm.
So it's if you think about all of the money to study this and that about terrorism, to all these new gizmos they have at airports to scan people with.
Yeah, it's a huge
and
industry.
Lots of government grants for investigating this stuff. There's lots of money to be made there.
Mm-hmm.
Those people want to turn that in and speak the truth.
And this is why people don't want us to be talking about this. It's quite interesting because every one of these videos it's not even about being monetized because they're not monetized. They're taken down, or I get a message to say that they're not appropriate. They're hidden. And we've just heard about how Twitter does this. Well, YouTube, Twitter, all these social media sites are really just collection agencies to see where people are going and what they're doing. And so, this kind of information, if it's in the hands of people like you, the audience members, you can actually see when it's happening. And somebody is asking about the Plasco building in Tehran. Well, you can start to see the signs. If you read the book and you start to look at the evidence and you see what happens when this technology is used, it becomes very obvious when you see it being used, say, on a bridge, which it has been, there's every reason to believe that it's been happening in North America since 2001. And clearly it's been happening around the world. If you look at some of the evidence from Iraq.
If you don't know it exists, then you don't see, most people don't see true evidence. They don't ask questions. Because it's not my job, it's not my problem, and they just look the other way because they don't want to, fill their brain cells with data they don't need to be messing with because it doesn't serve them any good purpose.
And yet they will.
It gets them into trouble.
I'm sorry, but and yet they will start speculating about things without having read the book and without having the evidence. They'll speculate about things like the California fires, in which there were papers that burn, for instance, and anybody that understands this type of technology would have read that part from the book and said, oh, okay, well, whatever this technology is, there's certain characteristics, and one of them is that paper does not burn. Just like in your microwave oven, you can put in a paper towel and put a potato on top of it. The potato will cook, but the paper towel will stay, it gets warm, but it only from the potato that's been cooking it doesn't burn. And and you can also tell that when you put aluminum in the microwave, it has another reaction. So we can start using our common sense to see that there's certain reactions that take place when a certain technology is at work.
Right. There's a variety of different things that can be going on, but it needs to be studied first, not just A equals B. And those who are saying that the same thing that happened to the World Trade Center happened with the California fires, that's a bit silly because you look at any of the evidence, it doesn't agree. Did everything turn to just about everything turn to dust and the dust go up into the atmosphere? No. In California fires, but in Manhattan on 9/11, most of the buildings turned to dust in midair. A lot of the dust went up and went, down the eastern seaboard. And there's various things like that. And also, he had some people come out alive. They look up, see blue sky, and come out, and they didn't get cooked to death.
That was stairwell B. Somebody was asking about that. So
Yeah.
if they're still there.
Tower 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tower 1, second, third, or fourth floor. They were coming down from high up above, and they got down to the second, third, and fourth floor in stairway B when the building came apart. And they hunkered down, and then, with the dust cleared, they looked up and saw blue sky. They were thinking they'd be buried under 106 floors of rubble. And they were surprised to see blue sky, and they went out of their own power, and one guy said it was like going out onto an empty football field. Where'd the building go?
Mm-hmm.
And people quit asking that question, where's all the rubble? Where's the material? Because nobody else gave an answer. And people are herded easily. And when you get herded in groups easily, it freaks them mess up. Because that means that nobody's really thinking, and the group is just following, playing follow the leader.
Yes. It's a very good skill to be able to think and to do research. If you have a question, then it's best to go with your hunch and to go and find out more about it. Somebody was asking about Winter Haven. Do you know about
Project Winter Haven? Yeah, that happened in my book about Project Winter Haven.
Right.
And, there's some evidence from that, too. And the charging of the airplane wings, and, that it's in the same section with Ed Leedskalnin. But it's, be comfortable knowing that there are things you don't know, and be comfortable setting those on a shelf until you have another piece of information. Like I said, let the evidence come to you. Let the evidence tell you what happened. Don't force it someplace. Like the image I had of the guy hanging from the 105th floor by one hand and one foot, appearing to take his pants off. That picture, I didn't really get it at first. Like something important in this picture. I didn't know what it was, so I put it aside. Until later, it came to me what the issue was. It was something I knew that this picture was telling me. And then after I got to seeing other things, or another thing that one of the earliest aha moments I had was that tipping top of Tower 2. It tips, and then it stops tipping, and it appears to go straight down, then turn into dust on the way down. And you say, well, that kind of looks like it violates the laws of angular momentum. How can you have this 35-story chunk rotating over and then stop rotating? That's the answer. That's one of those things I put aside, and until I went, aha. That if you have it as a rigid object, it would have to keep rotating. What that means, it's no longer a solid rigid object. You can have conservation of angular momentum if all the particles in there keep rotating. It's the sum of all the angular momentum of all the particles in the building, but the outer part looks like it stops rotating. That right there is evidence that the building turned to dust. It came apart. It starts rotating over, and it never, it stops tipping over. It's really miraculous.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing, that's the other aha moment. Looking at the demise of Tower 2, where it looks like suddenly the building, dust goes everywhere. Like and that's when I was like criticizing Stephen Jones, saying that it was thousands of degrees, but you have a broken water main and firefighters wading through it. It's not steam, and if it's thousands of degrees, it doesn't work. And when water becomes steam, it suddenly needs more room. It's by 1,600 times more room. So that's why you get steam explosions. And I just been, looking into that, and then I'm looking at the tipping top of Tower 2 and seeing, wow, that building looks like it's turning into steam. Suddenly all the particles are repelling each other. And you don't get that with a bomb. A bomb blows chunks. Chunks go flying. They stay chunks while they're flying until they hit something else. This is something that's just suddenly, all the particles are repelling each other, and you can see it as the stuff's falling. And that was I call it the Alka-Seltzer effect. But that was also the tipping top of Tower 2. But you keep looking at evidence. You don't force it into a preconceived answer, because then you don't see what really happens. You let the evidence come to you, let it speak to you, listen to it. And just keep looking at it. I looked at the data so much, it's like I'm standing on a corner of Church and Dusty Street, mentally, and I know who's to my right, who's to my left, and what's going on, because I've reviewed this situation so many times. The full scene, not bite-sized talking points. The truthers would often talk about the word explosions. They wouldn't say what was exploding. And the things that were identified as exploding were the air tanks that the firefighters wear in the fire trucks. They were exploding. It didn't mean they put a bomb in their air tank. It's strange things like that you start picking up on if you don't have a preconceived idea of it. And there's lots of other interesting data. But the important thing is to not go by hearsay. People have talking points. Judy Wood doesn't know basic laws of physics, and she doesn't understand this, doesn't understand that. And that would get repeated. And that was such an easy way to control where people were looking. That directed people away from looking at what I was showing. It was rather impressive how easily people could be manipulated away from looking at the facts. So think about that in the future is, when somebody makes a claim, well, I'd like to see the evidence of that. Doesn't mean that you don't trust the person, you just want to see the evidence yourself, because maybe this person just believed that because they heard it from that person, heard it from that person, heard it from that person.
Mm-hmm. It's an amazing thing to really start doing our critical thinking. It really is. And when we start thinking about things critically, it changes the way that we see the world, and it doesn't make us so much skeptical as it makes us aware. I think it just piques our awareness of the world around us, and we start, I start to even look at nature in a different way, because it's pretty phenomenal in and of itself. And thankfully I had a dad that would kind of show me things. We'd stop and we'd look at things, and I think it really helps in a world where everything is very busy and we get quite distracted, to just stop for a minute if we don't understand, or if something doesn't ring true, or even if we hear something from someone like James Corbett or whoever. We're not necessarily picking on James, we're just taking what he said about a specific thing and breaking it down, so that when you do listen to him or anybody else, you can sort of go back to the book. I hope you have a copy of the book. But at the very least, you can use the resources that are available to you. I'm really big on that. You've got all these resources. You don't have to listen to somebody else and just take it in verbatim and not question it. You have lots of resources at your disposal.
Right. My book is not, specifically about 9/11. It uses 9/11 as an example to teach critical thinking. It's because most people believe they know what happened that day, and then they start looking and they say, "Oh my gosh, that was right in front of my face. Why didn't I see it?" As they go through the book, it's very effective in showing people how easily they had been manipulated. We all get manipulated in some form or another, especially advertising and I forgot what I was listening to earlier today, where somebody was just talking about, we need to do something it was a movie or something, how to up our sales for Christmas and have a better window display. It's even that, a window display. It's how it affects the people outside to make them come into your store to buy something. So everything's about manipulation, and to be able to understand, where that stops and where reality starts. It's just like the 4 out of 5 doctors recommend such and such. To understand that, I do know personally, at one point in time at least, that was defined by how many doctors returned the survey. Some doctors didn't bother wasting their time on the survey, and it was stated that those would be assumed as they're condoning this product. So
Right.
maybe 4 out of 5 doctors didn't return the survey. So they said 4 out of 5 doctors recommend whatever.
Oh, it's amazing because when we listen to the climate, the people who say that others are climate deniers, every time they attach that 97% of scientists say that the Earth is warming because of man-made activity, which may or may not be so, but that is a totally bogus assumption because of the way that things were skewed in terms of that particular study. But the thing is,
yes, my understanding it was asked, how many think that man-made, what do you call it, pollution, harms the planet or something like that,
Yeah, and there's apparently
so people would agree.
And the folks that were questioned were not actually scientists. They were people that were in science-related programs. And so, again, it doesn't really matter what the study is, but I would want to ask more questions about that study. But it's amazing to me how people will repeat it back as, again, repeaters rather than reporters. And even when I was in a class at university, I said, well, that hasn't been proven. It was written in a textbook. And I really appreciated the instructor because she went home and did her research, and she apologized the next day because all of the students were, telling me what a goof I was. And I was just saying, I wasn't saying that it was wrong. I was just saying that that hadn't been proven. And of course, she came back and she said, you know what? She's right. It hadn't been proven. And it was really great to hear someone using their critical thinking, and I did respect that professor at that point.
Applauding right there. That's brilliant.
It was very brilliant. And so there's 2 questions. One is, have you ever looked into evidence about the Plasco building?
I don't even know what the Plasco building is.
Okay, so that would be a no.
Something that caught fire or something that fell down. There are weird things I know that have happened. But it's how has it been presented to us to make us, skeptical, or is it something we noticed ourselves? And that's a big difference right there. If something is like the California fires were obviously presented to make people think something weird was going on, and then people jumped on the bandwagon rather than studying the thing and saying, whatever is here's what my summary is. Of it. It's how you are led, because you often might think it's your own ideas, but you've been led down that path. Unless you yourself have just independently collected the evidence and looked at it for yourself, you're often told what to do. Just in first impressions stick. And how many people first learned about my work through being told, "Oh, she's bogus," and most of those people move on, and they don't even look for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big thing. It's easy to control people that way. And my book, again, only has evidence in it. So why would people be so afraid to have you look at it?
Evidence is scary. There is another question.
Unless the objective is to cover it up.
And it's very easy to cover things up because we have I don't like the term dumbed down. I think it's that we have been psyoped. We've really had our minds controlled, and it could be as much as anything, the chemical warfare that's going on in the sky. It could be anything that's going on. If you are aware of chemtrails or the various medications that we take, or the fact that a lot of people are on medication.
Programming programs you.
Yes, there's so many things in our environment that can cause us to be dumbed down. Besides, it's being tired. Sometimes just the fact that people are so tired from working all the time and looking after their families that you can, you turn on the TV and you listen to the mainstream media while you're making dinner and dealing with your kids. It goes into your head, and that's what you believe. that you're not able to go and check it out.
There was an interesting thing I heard last night at the beginning of Mark Levin's show. He went into Wikipedia. I call it Wikipedia. Wikipedia. He went after them last night on because they allow people to edit and deface the Wikipedia page about him, and he was talking about how much that site shapes public opinion. So if he's trashed on there, people have get an opinion about him based on what it says on Wikipedia, and for me, they had to totally demolish my page, not allow it, and ban anyone who tries to put a page up for me, because there at least would be a handful of people who would want to go see why I was being trashed and go look for the evidence themselves, and they couldn't afford that. So if you get people to go through this Wikipedia business, you can shape public opinion pretty easily. And it was interesting, though, that he was talking about how he'd been trashed by Wikipedia, and that in the past, that if somebody had vandalized his page, Wikipedia would then fix it and then lock it so nobody could vandalize it. And he said, so they can do that. Why don't they do it anymore? Because they want it that way. They want people to be able to deface certain pages.
Mm-hmm.
And that shapes public opinion.
Yes.
So.
And this California fires thing has taken off like a firestorm, if you don't mind me saying. And it is interesting how many times people have mentioned Dr. Judy Wood in their videos, and basically because they're either thinking that DEW weapons were used and are going that direction, or after your interview with Andrew Johnson, they're quite angry that you don't believe that DEW.
We weren't stating one way or another. We were just saying, what the logic is. You got to study a problem before you're going to come to an answer. We weren't, picking on anything. Just saying that it's not, very bright to immediately jump on a bandwagon before you even know what you're jumping onto. And how many of these people who make these videos had ever studied fires before? And thankfully you, Jody, actually went out and studied a fire. The ones in Australia, and just looking what, this is what forest fires look like. But if you didn't know what normal forest fires look like, or a variety of forest fires look like, you could be talked into thinking that all of this is strange.
Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean to say that there might not be something at work there, because when you look at it, it does seem like there is a destruction that was quite a bit higher than it would have been, say, 100 years ago. But what's different about now?
Not necessarily.
But when I look at it, I'm just thinking about things like we have smart meters now. We have all of these different things that.
That's a theory, but
it's
still, if you don't know what things were like when, that's sort of like the same as the global warming business, saying that we've raised the temperature by 0.001 degrees in the past 100 years. Well, 50 years ago, we couldn't have measured temperatures to that significant digits.
Mm-hmm.
It's so silly.
Yeah.
But it's about looking at the whole problem. I'm not jumping on board or off board.
Mm-hmm.
It's just saying you need to research it first. Yeah, there's a lot of other things to look at too. Like you want to see I've always said I want to see an environmental impact statement about smart meters and cell phone towers and all that, because that's something that has changed the environment. And what effect does that have? I'm not saying one way or the other of what quote did it, but these things need to be studied, and you can't just jump on board with a theory and then say that's fact. And if I don't agree with your theory, or if I don't promote your theory, then therefore I'm bogus. That's sort of silly. That's what do you call it? It's a pressure for peer pressure, and it's manipulative and a different control mechanism for public opinion.
Well, I think that's the issue here, is that it's a control mechanism, and that's the thing that, for me, as soon as I realized that this was part of the control, it made me feel very insecure, because if I can be controlled about things like what I believe about a certain incident so easily, then imagine how easy it is to control me on some even more important issues that are life and death. And I think it's really important that we all sort of get a grip here and start to really think about the world in terms of evidence and not getting swept away, especially when it's scare tactics. Now, there's things like false alarms in Hawaii. You got to use your common sense, and if it says that you have to hide, you've got to hide. But then in looking at it, what was the purpose of that, and what purpose do all of these things serve in order to distract us from something else that might be happening in the news as well?
Yeah, my first gut feeling was, well, who's sending it? Where's it coming from? And how do they know it's going to stop in Hawaii and not keep going? How do they know Hawaii's the target? There's a lot of questions that just didn't have answers, and that's where my skepticism started kicking in. That it's like weird, but also the story afterwards doesn't make sense either. Somebody hit the wrong button and that happens. No, if somebody hit the wrong button, you at least have, like, it's coming from whatever direction even, and it's more information about it, like to know what safety measures you need to be taking.
Mm-hmm.
But and then to last, what was it, 38 minutes until they sent out the oops, that was a mistake, ignore the last message. 38 minutes? There's a problem there.
Especially because there weren't any fighter jets yet again being scrambled,
right,
which is the first thing that would happen in the first few minutes.
38 minutes, yeah. And so let's say the guys, the boss supposedly, as their story goes, the boss supposedly took responsibility for the underling who pushed the wrong button. But still, why did the boss then realize that he got that alert on his cell phone or on the TV set or on the radio, or there's also sirens, the public alarm system, the audible thing. So, yeah, and I said to someone that even Helen Keller would know that there was an alarm, because they'd feel the ground rumbling as the people were traveling down the street, because apparently people were in this big panic. So why did it take the boss 38 minutes to figure out somebody hit the button by mistake?
Mm-hmm.
He gets the alarm immediately, on his cell phone or whatnot, and doesn't he, say, okay, what's going on? Why didn't I know about this?
Right.
Yeah, so it comes down to asking yourself questions like that. But yeah, meanwhile, you've taken some precautions, but you still keep thinking about it. And you go, oh, wait a minute, no, that doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's this interesting thing of staying in the moment and saying, what is this? And not then jumping off into a whole other bandwagon and a whole other set of conspiracy theories, because of course there's the bomb that was supposedly being smuggled in at another airport by an NBC crew, and there'd been an NBC crew in Hawaii. Now, these things may be related, but
fake bomb, supposedly to see if they can catch the guys passing it through the security or something.
And so, yeah, this is the difficulty in a world full of information, where we have the internet and we have all of the different ways to get information given to us in a moment. Because, I mean, you told me about that. I didn't know anything about it. Now, if in the old days, I would have had to have a TV or a radio on or something, and I would never have known about the Hawaii situation until much later. And then I would have heard it from the mainstream media. I wouldn't have heard it from the horse's mouth. People who live there are able to communicate the situation. So we live in a very confusing world in many ways, because we have to really be thinking all the time. And
apparently it went out over radio, and it went out over TV, and it went out to messages to cell phones.
Cell phones.
As well as the civilian alarms, the horn that sticks out, in the middle of the street kind of thing is, audible alarms. But you have to stop and apply logic tests to things, as you have time to do while you're getting your act together, figure out where you're going. But you stop and think too, and like, wait a minute, would they've sent an incoming missile from, and they know where it was coming from, or why had they disarmed it in midair? You start having lots of other questions. It just the the questions you have about it with the data you're given are much more than you'd see if that was real. I mean, it disarms it real fast.
Mm-hmm.
But you wonder if they're, what they're training people for, or they wanted to see people panicking, or who knows. But coming back to the original thing here, it's about critical thinking, logical thinking, and thinking yourself, not just repeating a list of talking points someone gave you, but actually being responsible for what you say, what you pass on to someone else. And you can't say, well, it's not my fault, it's what I heard through the grapevine. That is your fault if you're repeating it.
Right.
Don't repeat it if you have not verified that it is true.
Well, I would say particularly for people who have a large audience, and I'm thinking about James Corbett here and various other people that do have people that come to them for information because they've put themselves out there as a source of information. And while they may have disclaimers that say this is just my opinion, there are many, many people that will believe
rely on it.
Everything that's said, even though 90% of what he says is probably accurate. There's things that he comes out with.
That's the most effective person to put out disinfo. Is someone that you really trust, and so you decide that last 10% you're going to blindly trust because you know the other 90% is true.
And I think that's the thing, because someone like James Corbett is he's well spoken and he does a good presentation. And sometimes I have wondered in the past, and then of course you talked to me about this, and it made me consider some of the other things where I had kind of questioned his intention. What was the point? And so now I'm starting to really think about everything that he's saying, as well as everybody else. I want to make sure that I get a second set of information, some evidence that will give me ideas to the contrary too. I think that's the other thing, is look at everything.
With regard to like engineering data, you don't cherry pick your data because that's biasing your data. If you decide to throw out this data point, not that data point, no, you got to throw out the whole data set. And so I apply that also to others. If I find there's something bogus in somebody's presentation, I tend not to want to listen anymore because there's things that I don't know that I might be falsely swayed by. Then I move on and find somebody who, thus far is flawless. If somebody accidentally repeats something bogus, and then right after it goes, oops, I messed up. And if that's a once in a lifetime thing or a long-term thing, and it's also if they immediately correct it, it can be seen a little bit differently. But when you're responsible for everything you say, so don't say anything like what I said to Greg Jenkins. That was early on, and I wasn't prepared to say anything more than I said, so I didn't. He was trying so hard to get me to step beyond what I knew that I knew that I knew, and I wouldn't go there. And his way of dealing with it was to roll his eyes and make it look like I don't know anything, and to convince the audience that I'm an idiot. Well, that's why they were trying to interview me early on, but to see if they could also manipulate me into saying something else. And it didn't work. And so don't let anybody ever get you to say anything beyond. And if somebody else is speaking beyond what they know because they want to make it sound like they know more, that's the kind of person to be skeptical of, because they're liable to just pick up rumors and run with them.
Well, I think that's a really good spot to end the show. It seems as though there's still a few people in the chat, and I encourage people.
Any questions or so they might
There's
have?
a discussion going on about the Plasco building, and I think it's really great that Nick and Christophe are talking amongst themselves and sort of looking at some of the evidence of this particular situation and trying to figure out how it lines up with the idea of DEW weapons being used. But there's
DEW weapons.
Well, an energy weapon. An energy weapon. Or what weapon was used, shall we say, or whether it was a weapon or just a natural situation. And I think if you take
instead of trying to jump to what done it. You go back to first establishing what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And not trying to figure out how to. That was the problem with the California fire people is they're trying to jump to what did it. And so
Well,
they're
these
jumping
guys
past,
these guys are doing a good job, because I sort of
good.
mischaracterized. They said that they didn't see dustification. It looked hollow, but they the buildings were mostly empty, and so there's a kind of deconstruction, if you want to put it that way, of the situation between them.
You just figure out like characteristics of something like this.
Yes.
The Cobar Towers that I have questions about. I haven't studied it in detail, but a bomb, is their explanation. But why is the building sliced in half? And half that's still standing, and half that is gone. Hello, I've got some questions. Seems to me we have a problem. I can state stuff to that point, but I'm not going to say exactly what did it. And that's not the goal. The goal is to say, Houston, we have a problem here with the official explanation. But it's what happened is the important thing, not what did it. Not naming, just, spin the dial and name that weapon game. That will get you into trouble, because you're busy trying to take a multiple choice test where the correct answer may not even be on the multiple choices.
Mm-hmm. Could be something totally different.
That's what the deal was with 9/11, because people say, well, is it a bomb, or is it the official story? Or is it thermite, or is it the official story? They're doing this false choice game, or is it space beams? And they wouldn't be looking at what happened. And that's all it's about, is what happened. And you can't solve anything until you know, and let the evidence tell you what happened, and it'll speak to you. And you look at the cover of my book, that picture, and you say, what the heck's going on there? This building looks like a dust fountain, just frothing up into dust. And it's mighty strange looking. That's a good thing to observe that. And I say, I guess that's what a collapse looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And the smoke, that's from fires.
Right. Yeah.
And just and be responsible for what you say and what you pass along. Because if you pass along bogus information, that says something about you. And so if you say, I don't know, that's a good thing to say, if you don't know. And don't speak beyond your knowledge, because people tend to want to just run with rumors, especially like in a panic situation. That's an easy way to manipulate people.
Mm-hmm.
Mind control from the trauma-based mind control of 9/11 is, how many spy cameras and airport scanning devices and chip readers and so forth got put in place because of 9/11. Why do we have to do this because of 9/11? Why about this because of 9/11? Everything is because of 9/11. It was a trump card that allowed the no pun intended for a catch-all for control of people. That's what I saw it as. And to be able to look at what you do know, and then and understand that the rest you don't. But just to know what you do know, it's often enough. Just say that then doesn't make sense over there.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you know the seismic information from Manhattan on 9/11, you say, the building didn't slam to the ground. Definitely wasn't bombs, and it also gravity collapse. You can rule that out. And there's several seismic things, and it was actually, noticed in the news report they just didn't know what to think of it, so they ignored it. But they didn't lie about it.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, there's a couple of other questions, and I have put in the chat, there is a question about other sources. I put checktheevidence.com as a very good website.
Oh yes, thank you for bringing that up. I meant to, because we were talking about PsyOps, and the expert on PsyOps is this Andrew Johnson.
Andrew Johnson.
He started out watching my work, and and what was happening to it, and how this weirdness around me that started happening, and so he started documenting it. And his first book was Finding the Truth, and then stuff continued on, and then Holding the Truth is the the sequel to that that recently came out, and both of those are available on his website. And I think you put up the links to it, to those.
Yes, they're also on Character Driven. If you go to Character Driven, someone was saying that they were having a hard time with the CAPTCHAs. Is anybody else having a hard time with the CAPTCHAs on Character Driven? Because of course I wouldn't see that because I'm already logged in. So I can fix that for you. So please let me know if you are having a problem. That's something that I'll get to. And the other thing is you can sign in with your Facebook if you go that direction. You don't have to actually even create a new account. You can just sign in. The only reason that I have people sign in is, of course, to keep things private and to minimize the number of trolls that are able to get on to the site, and so that there can be a somewhat private community. I am not under the illusion that it's completely private, but you'll notice there's no advertising or any such thing there. So it's a nice.
Cuts down the riffraff.
It cuts down in the riffraff, and of course, if there are problems. Oh, okay. So there's another person that was having a hard time signing up. Now I apologize for that, and thanks for letting me know. I will take a look at it, and if you can stay in touch with me, let me see. If you can't get onto the site, you can send me a message at characterdriven@live.com, and please let me know, because this is the only way that I'm finding out that there are problems, because I do get people that are registering, but clearly that's through Facebook and not going the other direction, not the other option. Okay, thank you. So there was one other question. Who are journalist channels you find to be credible? Is that something that you want to broach? Or, you know, I just mentioned that I do follow George Webb's investigation. Totally subjective, but I find him to be a good investigator. He's not a journalist. He's basically showing people how to do an investigation with critical thought and how to correct your thinking as you go along. But anyway, Dr. Judy, do you have anybody that you follow or that you can recommend?
Yeah, I tend to move around, I guess, not from the same watering hole for too long, but look at various other things and think about things. Like I mentioned the 50 Ducks in a Hot Tub site that I like to look at, where this guy is raising ducks to feed the homeless and also donates the eggs to the food bank. But he just does real life stuff. But it allows you a different perspective of things too, because everything's cause and effect. But Jordan Peterson, I've enjoyed watching a lot of his stuff, and that a recent interview he did was it reminded me so much of the Greg Jenkins thing, where and he was giggling and laughing about it, kind of. It was so silly that she was projecting. Now you said such and such. No, I didn't say that. To the contrary, I said this, and it was just over and over again, to the point there was no coherent story coming out of that. And that might be a good one to link to. You know, for an example of, you know, why the Greg Jenkins thing seems incoherent. It has nothing to do with the person being interviewed. It has to do with the interviewer who's got an agenda, and then they don't succeed at their agenda because the interviewee is putting their foot down and being honest and truthful.
Yes.
And that was what's so great about hearing that. I think I gave you a copy of that, Jody.
Sorry, I was distracted. What is it?
Oh, you found the let's see. Let's see. I'm getting it up right now.
People have good ideas about what they would like you to deconstruct. Like the episode with Jesse Ventura is one of them. What we're going to be doing is putting all the information up on Character Driven. I will get all the bugs worked out. I guess what I was trying to do is to keep people out, and it really worked, because even the people that want to get in can't get in. And so it's called a CAPTCHA, and I don't know what's wrong with it, but I'm going to take a look at it and try and get that figured out. So I'm hoping that everyone that's in the room will either go over there with their Facebook account or else give it a try later. I'm having a few computer issues today. Right now, my major computer is completely dead, and I'm using backup right now. So it's, if I sound a little bit frazzled, then that's probably why. Because
yeah, that's hard to deal with, and you don't know what if you're thinking of what you lost on your computer, and
yeah, I am, and I do take classes. I'm a student. I don't know that, you know, I'm an older student, but I'm right in the middle of working on some things, and so there's a few distractions. And I think somebody was saying, do you think that's a coincidence that that happened right before the show? And I really wonder, because I've never had that problem. It went completely wonky right as we were going to air, and I've never had that problem before.
You were going to reboot because something wasn't working right. It was sluggish, and it takes a long time for. It was like the internet was real slow or something. You thought you'd reboot and then call me right back, and then you couldn't reboot.
I couldn't reboot, and then yesterday when Dr. Judy and I were talking, it just shut down for no particular reason.
Yeah.
So I'm beginning to have a couple of second thoughts about what's going on there. But of course, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a conspiracy realist. You know, I just look at the.
I don't know. I don't like to talk about conspiracies. That means you know that who was involved, because it's that two or more people conspired to do something illegal. But you just say something strange is happening.
Something strange is happening, definitely. And I've had a couple of others.
It could be one person, you know. So
sure.
That's not a conspiracy.
That's true. So in the background here, I've been kind of working on looking at the website, and I'm also trying to, I guess, wrap up.
Did you get the link that I just sent you?
You did, and so what I'm going to do is put that up on the site. It's a Jordan Peterson cut that you've sent, and that's one of the things that I'm going to be doing during the week between shows, as Dr. Judy sends me things that she finds useful based on our conversation today or upcoming interviews that we're going to be doing. I'll be putting those resources on the website so that folks will be able to find them whether they're logged in or not.
now, imagine if on this they had poor lighting and a profile shot of Jordan Peterson, and monkeyed with the imagery. It would be just the same as the Greg Jenkins thing.
Well,
but it's
yes.
from the BBC, I think, wasn't it?
Yes, I think it was, and I'm just looking at, and also I want to let you know that I did find the Greg Jenkins video at one point while you were talking, and
it's not worth looking into unless you want to verify that the transcript is correct.
Sure.
But it's a PsyOps. If you first listen to it, don't watch it, just listen to it.
So I should put up the audio maybe.
With one impression, and then when you watch it, you come away with a different impression.
Okay.
Because it's somebody knew how to do PsyOp imagery. Like you say, it's like holding a flashlight under your chin to look like a spooky person.
Right. Yep. Scary Dr. Judy Wood.
Based on that, after that, Stephen Jones recruited Greg Jenkins to write a hit piece on me.
Mm-hmm.
And accidentally, I got a copy of that.
Accidentally. It's funny how that happens.
Because the person, Greg Jenkins was boasting about it to his group, and somebody in the group, and then sent around bragging on it to the group, and then somebody sent it to me from there.
Well, it seems that you're going to get a hold of things. If people are talking about you, then you get it somehow disclosed. People will send it to you or let you know in some way about what's happening.
Well,
so
I usually don't like to mess with it. The Greg Jenkins thing that so many people used as proof that I was bogus, but how is it proof I'm bogus? It's no different than proving that Jordan Peterson is bogus from this video. No, this video just shows that the interviewer had an agenda, or she had something in her mind that she was believing so strongly that she couldn't see the facts through her belief system or something. It's haywire, because everything whenever he'd say something, she would inject, oh, you're saying such and such.
Well, we're being taught that as well on the mainstream media. If you know what you're going to be finding if you go to certain stations. You absolutely know what their agenda is, and that's why it's great that we have.
They tell you what to think, and that's important to realize how that works, how easily you can be influenced that way. And it's like Greg Jenkins, I don't do anything about vapor resist. And then he's talking about the calculations that are needed to determine if the building was vaporized. What are you doing that for? It's a distraction. Then I get made fun of, oh, you say calculations are a distraction. Yeah, they distract you away from looking at the evidence of what happened.
Well, you have a little
calculations require assumptions.
Dr. Judy has a little inkling of what Trump is dealing with at this point, with just the constant, pummeling.
Noise.
It's constant noise to distract from what's really happening. And once we begin to see
I see it as the same thing. It's kind of like it takes one to know one. I mean, even through the pre-election stuff, that it was, why are they working so hard at that rather than doing their job?
Yeah. I think people are beginning to really see this.
Why is it spin?
Yes.
What?
They're beginning to really see this, and it's not working anymore. And I think it's really panicking those that have been doing this so successfully over the many decades that it's worked well.
You'd have to find a new one. Going back to that James Corbett quote, but I do find it interesting when certain academics, we'll say journalists, will go out of their way to avoid certain inquiries.
Yes.
When you see somebody squirming at something or working at something instead of what they should be doing, you have to wonder. Actually, I took it as a big, a sense of pride that Jenkins. I mean, how scary I must be to have somebody like Jenkins and Fetzer orchestrate this supposed interview, this ambush interview thing, with the bogus lighting and all this. And obviously, there was nothing of any content that was useful from that, and that was by design. And have you stopped beating your spouse yet? Over and over again. But I must have been pretty important for them to feel the need to do that. That's how I took that.
You are very important, and that's why I love to do this show. We're getting people saying thank you very much for this, and I am so thankful.
Thank them for listening. Yeah, that's even better yet. There's thinking people out there who are listening, and hopefully understanding all this, and that realize that what the game is. It's about manipulation of public opinion, and we need to resist that as much as possible. Or, talking about it is a good thing too. It helps sort it out.
Yes. Okay, well, I'm going to say goodbye to our audience because I think, at 2.5 hours, we've probably given you enough information to think about, but somebody was saying that it is the highlight of their weekend, which I find really rewarding. So thank you so much, Dr. Wood, because this is the highlight of my weekend as well. And I think we will let folks go, and hopefully you'll be able to carry on the conversation with each other once we get things sorted out on the website. And we'll see you over there because I'm on there quite often. And we can also, you can post questions and I will get them